The universe
Hey, can
never
you hear me?
planned for
Wake
humans
up.
to be heroes.
I'm here. The
It
call.
expected them to break
I've got you
first,
both. Hey,
to
can you
choose
hear me?
silence
Wake up.
over
I'm
sacrifice,
here. The call.
comfort
I've got you
over
both.
courage. On the frozen edges of Titan's Reach Station, death came quietly, not with explosions or screams, but with cold so deep it erased hope itself. Two alien sisters lay buried beneath the snow, unable to move, unable to call for help, their bodies shutting down one slow second at a time. And somewhere above them, a choice was about to be made that would shake entire civilizations. But this time, the choice wouldn't belong to the human who arrived. It would belong to the woman dying under the ice. Lyra Thorne felt her sister's heartbeat slowing against her chest, each pulse weaker than the last, each breath shallower. The cold had stopped feeling like pain an hour ago. Now it just felt like forgetting. Her fingers couldn't move anymore. Her legs had gone silent. But her mind still burned with one terrible clarity. They were going to die here, buried under 3 meters of ice and snow, hidden from scanners, invisible to rescue. And no one would ever know they had tried to matter. Kenna's voice came through the helmet comm, barely a whisper. Lyra, don't. Lyra knew what her sister meant. Don't use the beacon. Don't give away their position. Don't let the Dominion find them. Because being found by the Dominion meant something worse than death. It meant ownership. It meant being dragged back into the system that had swallowed their mother 9 years ago. It meant spending the rest of their lives as biological assets, valuable only for what their bodies could produce. Resonance bond females, rare, profitable, never free. Kenna had spent 9 years keeping them hidden, 9 years planning, 9 years stealing data and covering tracks and teaching Lyra how to survive in the spaces empires didn't watch. And now, at the end of it all, Kenna's instinct was still the same. Stay hidden, stay quiet, die invisible rather than die owned. But Lyra Thorne was 24 years old, and she had spent her entire life following her sister's rules. She had trusted Kenna's caution. She had believed in the plan. She had stayed silent when every part of her wanted to scream. And where had that gotten them? Buried under ice, heart stopping, fading into nothing. Not anymore. Lyra's right hand still had some feeling left. She focused everything she had into her fingers. Centimeter by centimeter, she moved her hand toward the emergency panel on her suit. The cold fought her. Her muscles screamed, her vision blurred. But she kept moving, because silence had never saved anyone. Silence was just another word for surrender. Lyra, no, please, Kenna's voice cracked. If you activate that beacon, they'll find us. The Dominion will find us. Lyra's fingers reached the panel. She forced them to curl, to press, to choose. I know, Lyra whispered, but someone else might find us first, and I'd rather die trying than die quiet. She activated the beacon. The pulse went out in all directions. A scream of electromagnetic energy cutting through the storm. A declaration that 2 lives existed here. 2 lives that refused to vanish without being seen. Kenna sobbed once, then went silent. And for a moment, Lyra thought she had made the worst mistake of her life. That she had just traded a quiet death for a living hell. Then she felt it. Not sound, not vibration. Something deeper. A presence. Moving toward them through the storm like a promise the universe had no right to make. Someone was coming. Silas Brennan had spent 8 months on Titan's Reach Station, and in all that time, he had perfected the art of not caring. He maintained 47 relay stations across the ice fields. He kept atmospheric anchors running on equipment that should have failed years ago. He worked contracts no one else accepted because no one else wanted to be this alone, this cold, this far from anything that mattered. And that was exactly why Silas stayed. Out here, no one pretended. No one lied about caring. No one promised to protect you while they calculated the profit margin of your death. The corporations didn't pretend these stations mattered. The Dominion didn't pretend these workers were anything but disposable. And Silas didn't pretend he was anything but a man who had run out of reasons to go home. 12 years ago, he had been someone different. A NASA engineer, a husband, a man who believed systems could be fixed if you just found the right equation. Then the Houston orbital crisis happened. Corporate security forces opened fire on civilian protesters. His wife Elena had been there, holding a sign that said, "Workers are not equations." They shot her anyway, calculated her death as acceptable loss. filed the paperwork while her body was still warm. Silas had tried to fight, tried to expose the truth, tried to make someone accountable, and he learned the hardest lesson of his life. Systems don't break because they're flawed. They break because breaking people is profitable. And when you realize that, you have two choices. Keep fighting a war you'll never win, or walk away from the battlefield entirely. Silas chose the ice. The storm warning came late, the way they always did on Titan's Reach. White clouds rolling across the frozen plains like a slow erasure. Static crackling through his helmet comms. Visibility dropping to nothing. Silas was 3 kilometers from his shelter, checking a malfunctioning relay, when the beacon hit his scanner. He almost ignored it. Protocol said report it. Wait for rescue drones. Wait for approval. Wait for someone else to decide if 2 unknown lives were worth the risk. But Silas knew the truth about protocols. They were designed to protect the system, not the people inside it. And Titan's Reach Station had no rescue drones, no fast approvals, only paperwork that arrived after funerals. He checked the scanner again. 2 life signs, buried, losing heat fast. Then he saw the signal strength. Weak, flickering, fading. They had minutes, maybe less. Silas stood in the storm, and for the first time in 12 years, he felt something other than numbness. Then his comm crackled. Not a voice, a data burst. Text only. Pushed through the interference with the last of someone's power reserves. 2 lives. Grid 7 Alpha. We refuse to die as property. Silas stared at those words. Not a plea, not a desperate cry for help. A declaration, a line drawn in frozen ground. And something about those words cut through 12 years of carefully maintained apathy. Because Elena had refused too. She had stood in front of armed security forces and refused to be silent, and they had killed her for it. And Silas had spent 12 years believing that refusal was just another word for suicide. But what if he was wrong? What if refusal was the only thing that mattered? What if the choice to be seen, to be heard, to matter? What if that was worth dying for? Silas turned off his safety lock and walked straight into the storm. The wind tried to kill him with every step. Snow cut across his visor like knives. The scanner pulsed once, twice, then died as ice built up on the sensor array. Silas kept walking. His oxygen reserves dropped. His core temperature fell. Warning lights flashed across his HUD, telling him to turn back, to choose survival, to let someone else make the hard choices. He ignored them all. Then he saw it, a collapsed transport ridge, metal twisted like broken bones, ice piled high, freshly fallen, an avalanche. Silas dropped to his knees and activated his thermal cutter. The machine screamed as it burned through frozen debris. His hands shook from cold and exhaustion. His oxygen alarm started beeping. But he kept cutting, kept digging, kept choosing. Minutes passed. The storm grew worse. Then the cutter hit something hollow. Hull plating. Silas tore away the last layer with his bare hands and forced open a crushed access hatch. Cold exploded outward, so intense it felt like fire. And inside the wreckage he saw them. 2 figures lay tangled together. Alien, female. Their skin shimmered faintly beneath torn survival suits, tones of silver and pale violet dulled by frostbite. One sister had wrapped herself completely around the other, her back exposed to the killing cold, her arms locked tight, protecting, sacrificing, choosing who would die first so the other might live seconds longer. Silas didn't think. He moved. He pulled emergency heat packs from his kit, pressed them against their chests, their necks, their cores. Their vitals were barely there. Heartbeat slow, dangerously slow. He lifted the smaller one first. She was lighter than expected. Too light. The storm nearly knocked him over. He stumbled, fell, got back up, carried her toward his shelter. Went back for the other. The older sister was heavier, harder to lift. His muscles screamed. His oxygen dropped into the red. But he didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't let himself think about what would happen if he failed. By the time Silas reached his shelter, he collapsed inside with them. The doors sealed, warmth rushed in, and 3 hearts that should have stopped kept beating. Hours passed. Silas worked in silence. He wrapped the sisters in every blanket he owned, connected them to portable heaters and oxygen lines. monitored their vitals with equipment designed for human biology, hoping the readings meant something similar for Solari physiology. Their body temperatures climbed slowly, too slowly, but they climbed. Then something strange began happening. Their neural patterns weren't just stabilizing, they were synchronizing. Not with each other. That made sense for siblings in crisis. They were synchronizing with him. Silas watched the monitors with growing unease. This wasn't standard recovery. This was something else. Something biological. Something old. He pulled up the xenobiology database, searched for Solari species, found fragments of information. Resonance females, bonding protocols, survival mechanisms, and buried in the warnings he found it. When Solari females approach death, their bodies enter a desperate search for stability, for an anchor, for something to keep them alive. And when they find it, their biology locks on, creates a resonance, a bond. Silas swore under his breath. Not real, he muttered. Just myths, survival legends. The universe disagreed. The younger sister stirred first. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly silver in the dim light. They locked onto Silas instantly, not with confusion, not with fear, with recognition. You came back, she whispered. Silas stiffened. I what? She struggled to sit up. He moved to support her, and the moment his hand touched her shoulder, he felt it. A pull, not physical, deeper, like his presence was the only thing keeping her nervous system from shutting down, like she had reached into the dark while dying and grabbed onto the first solid thing she found, and that thing had been him. You pulled us from the ice, she said, her voice stronger now. I felt it. I felt you. In the cold, when everything was fading. You were there. Silas shook his head. I just followed your beacon. This is the first time I've seen you. No, her gaze never left his face. My body knew you before my eyes did. That's how it works for us. When death is that close, we choose. Or our biology chooses. Someone to anchor us, someone to keep us alive. The older sister's fingers twitched. Her breath came in sharp. She woke with a gasp, eyes snapping open, and the first thing she saw was Silas. The reaction was instant. Her heart rate surged on the monitor. Her neural patterns spiked, mirroring her sister's, both of them synchronizing with Silas's own biometric signature. The medical equipment beeped wildly. Silas stepped back, hands raised. Hey, easy, I'm just trying to help. The older sister stared at him. You are human. Yeah, but you feel anchored. She looked at her sister, then back at Silas. What did you do? The younger one answered first. He saved us, Kenna, and our bodies chose him. Kenna's expression shifted through a dozen emotions in seconds. Confusion, anger, fear, then something harder. Calculation. She sat up slowly, never taking her eyes off Silas. Do you know what you've done? Silas felt his chest tighten. I pulled you out of the ice before you froze to death. If that's a crime, I'll take the charges. It's not a crime. Kenna's voice was cold. It's a chain. The younger sister reached out, touched Kenna's arm. He didn't know, sister. Doesn't matter. It's done. Kenna turned to Silas. Our species doesn't survive cold worlds alone. We don't have your thick skin or your resistant biology. When death comes close, our bodies adapt. They search for stability. They bond to whatever kept us alive. You became that stability. Silas felt like the walls were closing in. So what does that mean? The younger one spoke gently, like she was trying not to scare him. It means our lives are tied to yours now. We'll feel when you're near, feel safer when you're close. Our bodies will seek you out. Like instinct, Kenna added. Not choice, not love. Biology. Silas took another step back. This was wrong. This was exactly the kind of forced connection he'd spent 12 years avoiding. I'm not your owner, he said carefully. I'm not your commander. I'm just a man who couldn't walk away. The younger sister's eyes softened. I know, she whispered. It's not obedience. It's direction. My body wants to be near you, but my mind still decides what I do. Kenna's voice turned sharp. And direction can still become chains, human, even if you don't mean it, even if you're kind. Biology doesn't care about intentions. Silas met her eyes. Exactly, he said. So let's be clear. I didn't save you to own you. I saved you because it was right. And if this bond thing means you feel pulled toward me, fine. But you're still free to leave whenever you want. I won't stop you. I won't guilt you. I won't hold you here. Silence filled the shelter. The heaters hummed. The storm outside howled like it wanted in. Then the younger sister took a careful breath, like she was walking on ice that might break. My name is Lyra, she said. My sister is Kenna, and I need to tell you something. Silas nodded. I'm listening. We're not miners. We're not workers. We're assets. Lyra's hands gripped the blanket tighter. Our species is called Silari. We don't have an empire, we have contracts. We survive by being useful to empires. And our bloodline is rare, Kenna continued, voice flat. Resonance bond females. 1 in 10 million births. The Dominion uses females like us to control entire populations. Whoever controls the bonded females controls the loyalty of the species. We're leverage, profit, property. Silas felt cold spread through his chest. Someone's hunting you. Lyra nodded once. Our family sent us to Titan's Reach because it was supposed to be quiet. A place no one watched. A place we could disappear. And if they find us, Kenna didn't finish. She didn't need to. Silas walked to the comm console. The external uplink was damaged from the storm, but stabilizing. He tried the connection. Static, a faint carrier tone, a whisper of signal trying to break through. Then a voice. Cold. Official, not human. Repeat. Unknown shelter signature detected in Sector 7. Identify immediately. Silas froze. Lyra's head lifted sharply. Kenna sat straighter, every muscle tensing. The voice came again, more forceful. This is Dominion security vessel Arcturus Prime. You are operating on regulated territory. Respond with identification or be boarded under Imperial Commerce Authority. Dominion, the word hit like a hammer. Silas had heard the name before. Everyone had. The Dominion wasn't a government. It was a coalition of corporate empires that controlled half the settled galaxy. They didn't invade. They regulated. They didn't conquer. They acquired. And they didn't patrol frozen moons like Titan's Reach unless something valuable was here. Or someone. Silas killed the microphone and turned to the sisters. Did you trigger something? Kenna's jaw tightened. Our transport had a distress beacon. When it crashed, it must have pulsed a signal across old emergency channels. And that's why they're here, Lyra whispered. Silas looked toward the sealed door like he could see through metal and stormed to the ship waiting above. If Dominion forces board this shelter, they'll scan for life signs. They'll see 2 Solari resonance females. And then I won't be a rescuer anymore. I'll be a witness, a liability, or worse. A prize, Kenna said quietly. A human who bonded 2 resonance females without knowing. They'll want to study that, replicate it, use it. Lyra stood on shaking legs. We should run, now before they lock onto this location. But Silas was already moving. He pulled open a maintenance panel behind the comm console, exposing the power routing grid. His hands moved with practiced speed. We're not running, he said. Not yet. If I overload the external signature modulators, I can make this shelter look abandoned. Dead. No heat signature. No active life support. Lyra's eyes widened. But we're alive. That's why you stay low. No movement. No heat spikes. No nothing. Silas began rerouting power conduits. The Dominion scans for active systems. If everything looks frozen and dead, they'll mark it as storm damage and move on. Kenna's voice cut through the tension. And if they board anyway? Silas glanced at his tool rack. He wasn't a soldier, didn't have weapons, didn't have armor, just cutters and welders and electrical charge packs. But humans had survived worse with less. If they board, he said, they won't find what they're looking for. Lyra whispered his name. Not a question, not a demand, just his name, spoken with something that felt like trust he hadn't earned yet. Silas. He paused, met her eyes, saw fear there, yes, but also something harder. Determination. The same determination that had made her activate that beacon while her sister begged her not to. The same determination that had sent those words through the storm. Trust me, Silas said. Then he rewired the shelter. Not the safe way, not the corporate-approved way, the human way. He diverted power from external heating into the signature modulators, fed it through an induction coil, set a timed pulse. The shelter lights dimmed, the internal heaters dropped to minimal. To outside scanners, the structure would look frozen, empty, a dead shell in a dead zone. Silas held his breath and reactivated the comm receiver. Listening only, the Dominion voice returned, irritated now. Shelter signature remains unregistered. Life signs unclear. Prepare drone scan. A soft whine echoed through the storm outside. Something mechanical, something searching. Silas grabbed a coil cable and snapped it into the emergency venting system. This was going to hurt the equipment, might fry half the relays, but staying hidden was worth more than functioning hardware. He triggered the pulse. The shelter shuddered. A wave of electromagnetic interference burst outward like a silent scream. Every system overloaded for 3 seconds. The lights died completely. The heater stopped. Even the air recyclers went quiet. And outside, the drone's whine stuttered, sputtered, cut off. Darkness, silence, cold creeping back in. Then, through the comm speaker, that voice again. Cautious now. Drone signal lost. Sector 7 interference spike detected. Atmospheric ionization possible. A pause, then. Mark this location as unstable. Withdraw for now. Report anomaly to central operations. Silas didn't move until the carrier tone faded completely. Didn't breathe until the silence outside felt real again. The storm returned, but the immediate threat was gone. He reactivated the shelter systems manually. Light flickered back. Heat began flowing. Lyra let out a broken breath and leaned forward, almost collapsing. Silas caught her gently. Her skin was warm now, stable. Her eyes were glossy with exhaustion and relief. She looked up at him. You risked yourself, she whispered. For us. For strangers. Silas helped her sit back. I risked myself because it was right. That's all. Kenna's voice came quieter than before. You didn't just hide us. You fought for us. With your mind. Silas stood slowly. His own exhaustion was catching up now. Adrenaline fading, reality settling in. That was just a patrol, he said. If they report what happened here, real hunters will come. Ships with better scanners, teams with orders, and this trick won't work twice. Lyra's face went pale. Kenna's jaw tightened, but neither of them looked away. Neither of them broke. Silas walked to his storage locker and began pulling out supplies. Food packs, portable heaters, spare oxygen filters, a worn travel cloak that had belonged to Elena. He hadn't been able to throw it away. Now he was glad. Lyra stared. You're leaving. Silas shook his head. We're leaving, he corrected. There's a mining rail line that cuts across the ice plains. Half buried but still powered in some sections. It leads to an old relay station. Abandoned officially, but still connected to deep space channels. A place where you can send a message without being traced easily. Kenna leaned forward. Station Greyhawk? Silas nodded. Lyra whispered the name like it was a ghost story. That station's been dead for years. And Silas's eyes hardened with something Kenna recognized. Purpose. Then it's the perfect place for 3 people the galaxy isn't supposed to find. He handed each sister a heat cell band, checked the charge, made sure they understood how to activate the emergency protocols. Then he looked at both of them. Really looked. 2 women who had been willing to dig rather than be owned. 2 women who had chosen to be seen rather than stay safe. 2 women who somehow had become his responsibility. Not because of biology, not because of bonds. Because walking away now would mean forgetting why he came out into the storm in the first place. This isn't romance, Silas said quietly. This isn't some story where the hero saves the princesses and everyone lives happily. This is survival. And survival means making hard choices, trusting people you just met, moving before you're ready. Kenna met his eyes. If we go with you, we might bring war to your life. Silas didn't flinch. My life was quiet. Quiet almost killed you. He opened the shelter door. Cold air flooded in like a warning. The storm had lessened, but not stopped. Ice fields stretched to the horizon, broken only by the dark line of the rail system cutting through white emptiness. We move before the next scan, Silas said, And if the Dominion thinks this moon is a graveyard, let's make sure they keep believing it. Three figures stepped into the storm, and far above Titan's Reach station, in the dark where empires watched and calculated, a report was already being filed. Two residence females missing, a human signature present, a sector anomaly that should not exist. And when powerful beings smelled a mystery, they didn't let it go. Not until they owned it, not until they broke it. But they had never tried to break a human who had decided someone mattered more than safety. And they had never faced a woman who had chosen to scream into the void rather than die silent. They were about to learn why the galaxy should have feared those choices. The cold outside was sharper than before, not because the storm had worsened, but because Lyra Thorne knew something was hunting them now. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running away from the fight. She was running toward the place where she could finally make her voice heard. Behind her, Kenna followed, protective still, but different, watching her little sister with new eyes, seeing not the girl who needed protecting, but the woman who had made the choice Kenna never could. And beside them both, Silas Brennan walked through the ice, a man who had spent 12 years believing he had nothing left to fight for, now carrying two lives that reminded him what fighting meant. The shelter disappeared behind them. The rail line emerged ahead, and somewhere in the frozen distance, Station Greyhawk waited, silent, dark, forgotten by empires. The perfect place for a voice to be born. The rail line emerged from the ice like a scar across forgotten flesh. Old steel, rusted in places, buried under decades of accumulated snow. Most corporations had abandoned this route when the mining profits dried up, left the infrastructure to rot, left the workers to find their own way home. But humans built things to last, even when they didn't mean to. Even when prophets said, let it die. Silas knelt beside the control node, brushing ice away with gloved hands. His fingers moved quickly despite the cold. Still powered, he muttered. Barely. Lyra stood close, scanning the horizon with eyes that hadn't stopped searching since they left the shelter. Dominion sensors might sweep this route. It's a known transit line. Silas pulled a maintenance tablet from his pack, connected it to the node's access port. That's because the Dominion trusts automation too much. They scan for standard signatures, expected patterns. His fingers danced across the screen. Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to hide isn't to disappear. It's to create noise. He rerouted the rail's power draw into a harmonic feedback loop. Suddenly, the scanner grid lit up with dozens of false heat signatures scattered across kilometers. Wildlife patterns, debris movement, thermal fluctuations that looked organic, random, meaningless. To their sensors, Silas said, this whole sector just became clutter. Background noise. Nothing worth investigating closely. Kenna watched him work with an expression that hadn't softened since the shelter. You think like someone who's been hunted before. Silas didn't look up. I think like someone who watched hunters win because good people believed systems would protect them. He closed the tablet. Systems protect themselves. People have to be smarter. The rail platform hummed to life, ancient motors grinding against ice buildup. The transport car that emerged was more rust than metal, but it moved. That was enough. They climbed aboard. The car lurched forward, painfully slow at first, then finding rhythm. The ice fields began sliding past. Endless white broken by black rock formations that looked like bones pushing through skin. Titan's Reach station wasn't beautiful. It was honest. It showed you exactly what it was, a place where survival was the only achievement that mattered. Lyra sat near the edge of the platform, letting the wind hit her face. Her sister had always told her to stay warm, stay protected, stay safe. But Lyra was tired of protection, tired of wrapping herself in caution like it was armor. The cold hurt, yes, but it also woke something up, made her feel present, made her feel real. Kenna sat beside her, not speaking, just present. The older sister's instinct to shield, to guard, to stand between Lyra and danger. It had been this way for 9 years, since the day their mother vanished, since the day Kenna decided that keeping Lyra ignorant was the same as keeping her safe. You're angry with me, Lyra said quietly. Kenna didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was measured, careful. I'm angry you activated that beacon. I'm angry you made that choice without asking me first. Would you have let me? No. Then you understand why I didn't ask. Lyra turned to face her sister. Kenna, we were dying. Silence wasn't going to save us. It was just going to make our deaths quieter. Kenna's jaw tightened. And now we have a Dominion patrol looking for us. Now we have a human bonded to us who doesn't understand what he's risked. Now we're running toward an abandoned station with no plan except hope. Hope is a plan, Lyra said. Hope is a fantasy children tell themselves when they don't understand how the galaxy works. Lyra felt something sharp twist in her chest. I'm not a child anymore. Kenna looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, something cracked in that carefully controlled expression. No, she said softly. You're not. And I keep forgetting that. The railcar hit a damaged section. The motors screamed, grinding against frozen mechanisms. Silas moved immediately, dropping to the access panel, rerouting power manually. Lyra watched his hands work. Efficient, practiced, no wasted movement. This was a man who had spent years fixing things that were designed to break. Where did you learn that? Lyra asked. Silas glanced up. NASA, before I came out here, before I decided machinery was easier to trust than people. What changed? Silas's hands stopped moving for just a second. I watched people I loved get killed for telling the truth. And I watched the systems I believed in protect the killers. He went back to work. So I left. Came out here where the only truth that matters is whether your equipment works or you freeze to death. Kenna studied him. You ran. Yeah, Silas said without shame. I ran, and I'd do it again. Because staying would have meant becoming like them or dying like her. Her? Lyra asked gently. Silas finished the repair, stood up, wiped his hands on his suit. My wife, Elena, she was at the Houston orbital crisis, protesting corporate labor policies. They shot her for holding a sign. His voice was flat, empty of emotion, because the emotion had been burned out years ago. She believed the system would protect peaceful protest. She was wrong. The railcar lurched back into motion. Silas sat down across from the sisters. That's why I came out here. Lyra felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, from recognition. It mattered, she said, because it brought you to us, and now her refusal lives in what we do next. Silas looked at this 24-year-old woman who had nearly frozen to death hours ago and somehow found the strength to offer him absolution he didn't deserve. You sound like her, he said quietly. Then she must have been extraordinary. She was. Silas stood, and she'd tell you the same thing I'm about to. Hope isn't enough. We need a plan. The transport slowed as they approached another damaged section. This time the rail was completely buried under ice. Silas checked his scanner. We're 8 kilometers from Station Greyhawk. We can walk it, but it'll take 4 hours, and we'll be exposed. Kenna shook her head. Dominion patrols will sweep this route within 6 hours. We won't make it. Lyra stood, moved to the edge of the platform, looking at the ice field stretching ahead. Then we don't walk the route. We go under it. Both Silas and Kenna stared at her. What? Kenna said. Lyra pointed at the ice. You told me once about the old mining tunnels. The corporations dug underneath the surface for thermal vents. Most of those tunnels were abandoned when the mines dried up, but they're still there, still stable in places. Silas pulled up a geological map on his tablet, studied it. She's right. There's a tunnel network that runs parallel to the rail line, connects to Greyhawk's lower maintenance levels. He looked up. But those tunnels haven't been inspected in decades. Could be collapsed. Could be flooded with subsurface ice. Could be invisible to Dominion scanners, Lyra countered. Kenna's expression shifted. Not approval, not yet, but consideration. It's risky. Everything is risky now, Lyra said. The question is which risk gets us where we need to go. Silas smiled despite himself. You think like an engineer. I think like someone who's tired of running in circles. Lyra met his eyes. So what do we need to access those tunnels? 30 minutes later, they were descending into darkness. Silas had found an old mining access shaft half buried under snow. The ladder was frozen solid, so they rappelled down using cable from the railcar's emergency kit. The descent felt endless, dropping into cold so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Then their boots hit solid ground. Silas activated a chem light, Pale green glow pushed back the darkness just enough to see. They were standing in a tunnel carved through ice and rock. The walls were smooth, almost glass-like, where thermal drilling had melted and refrozen the surface. The air was still, dead, like being inside a tomb that forgot it was supposed to have bodies. "This way," Silas said, checking his compass. "Greyhawk should be northeast, 3 kilometers through this main tunnel, then up through a maintenance shaft." They walked in silence. The only sound was their breathing and the crunch of their boots on ancient ice. Lyra felt the weight of the world above them, thousands of tons of frozen rock that could collapse and erase them without anyone knowing they had existed. But somehow that felt safer than being above where scanners could see, where Dominion could find them. Down here, they were ghosts, and ghosts were hard to catch. Kenna walked ahead, scanning the tunnel with a light of her own, always alert, always protecting. But Lyra noticed something different now. Her sister kept glancing back, not to check if Lyra was keeping up, to see if Lyra was still there, still real. Like Kenna was just now realizing her little sister might slip away into a life she couldn't control. After an hour of walking, they reached a junction. 3 tunnels branching off in different directions. Silas checked his map, frowned. "Problem?" Kenna asked. "The map's outdated. These junctions don't match the original survey." He pointed at the middle tunnel. "That should lead to a thermal vent station. But the geological markers are wrong." Lyra stepped on forward, examining the tunnel entrances. She noticed something the others hadn't. Scratches on the wall, marks that looked almost like writing. Not human letters, not Solari either. Something older. "Wait," she said. "Let me see your tablet." Silas handed it over. Lyra pulled up the data files, started scrolling through archive surveys. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently. This wasn't luck. This was skill. Kenna watched with growing surprise. "When did you learn to read geological data?" "I've been studying cryptography and data analysis for 3 years, Lyra said without looking up. "You thought it was a useless hobby. I thought it was preparation for the day I'd need to think for myself." The words hung in the cold air. Not accusation, just fact. Kenna's face showed something Lyra had rarely seen. Shame. Lyra found what she was looking for. These marks aren't random, they're coordinate references. Old mining crews used them to mark safe routes when digital systems failed. She traced the symbols with her finger. "This one leads to Greyhawk's substructure. The other 2 are dead ends or collapsed." Silas looked at the symbols, then at Lyra. "How did you know that?" "Because I pay attention to things people think don't matter." She handed back the tablet. "We take the left tunnel." They did. And 40 minutes later, they emerged into a vast chamber that had once been a maintenance hub. Equipment still sat frozen in place. Workstations abandoned mid-shift. Coffee cups still on tables. Their contents long since turned to ice. It looked like everyone had simply vanished. Left their lives behind and never looked back. Silas found the access ladder to the upper levels. "This should take us directly into Greyhawk's core operations center. If the station still has any power reserves, that's where we'll find them." They climbed. Lyra's arms burned, her legs shook. But she didn't stop, didn't slow. Behind her, she could hear Kenna breathing hard too. Her sister, who was always strong, always capable, struggling just like Lyra. It made her seem human, vulnerable, real. They reached the top. Silas forced open a hatch that screamed with rust and age, pulled himself through, reached down to help Lyra up. Then Kenna. Station Greyhawk spread before them like a skeleton that forgot to lie down. The operations center was massive. Rows of terminals covered in dust and frost. Windows that looked out onto the ice fields, now so scratched and hazed they barely let light through. The whole place had the feeling of a cathedral built to worship efficiency, now abandoned by its gods. Silas moved to the central console, brushed away decades of accumulated grime, found the manual power override. Here goes nothing. He pulled the lever. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then deep in the station's core, something groaned. Ancient generators waking up. Systems that hadn't been asked to function in years, suddenly remembering their purpose. Lights flickered. Amber. Dim, but alive. The screens came online one by one, displaying corrupted data, error messages, system failures. But underneath all that noise, the station's core architecture was still intact. Still connected to the deep space communication arrays, still capable of sending messages to parts of the galaxy the Dominion didn't fully control. Kenna exhaled slowly. This place still breathes. Barely, Silas said. He began working through the systems, bypassing security protocols that no longer mattered, rerouting power from dead sections into the communication array. But it's enough. Lyra watched him work, watched lines of code scroll across screens. Watched Silas do what he did best, fix broken things, make dead systems live just long enough to matter. Who are you sending messages to? Lyra asked. Silas glanced at her. People who remember. During the Houston crisis, there was a network. People who didn't trust the official channels, who built their own communication systems. Independent traders, free captains, scientists who valued truth over tenure. They're still out there, still listening, still waiting for a reason to care. He typed commands, crafted messages in code that would mean nothing to automated scanners, but everything to people who knew how to read between the lines. Then he hit send. The messages went out in short bursts, encrypted, fragmented, untraceable to their origin point, spreading across the void like seeds looking for soil. Kenna stepped closer to the screen. You're telling them about us. Yes, Silas said, that puts us in danger. Yes, he repeated. Then why do it? Silas turned to face her. Because hiding only delays extinction. Exposure creates witnesses. The Dominion operates in shadows. They traffic people because no one's watching. They erase voices because no one's listening. But if enough people see what's happening, if enough people hear your story, it becomes harder to make you disappear quietly. Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just rescue anymore. This was strategy. This was Silas treating them not as victims to be saved, but as people whose lives could mean something beyond survival. What happens when they respond? Lyra asked. If they respond, Silas corrected, these networks don't trust easily. They've been burned before. But if even one person believes you, if even one ship captain decides your lives matter more than staying invisible, then we have options beyond running. The console beeped. Silas froze. That was fast. Responses were already coming in, not words, coordinates, multiple sources sending location data, meeting points, safe harbors, places where the Dominion's reach was weaker, where independent operators still held territory. Silas leaned back, something like wonder on his face. They heard us. Kenna studied the incoming data. Or they're laying traps. Some of them might be, Silas admitted. But I know these codes, these encryption patterns. This one here, that's Captain Reese Caldwell, former U.S. Space Force, left the service after they ordered her to fire on civilian ships. She runs an independent fleet now. Protection for hire, but she's got principles. Lyra read the message from Caldwell. Simple, direct. You made noise. That takes courage. You'll need help. Before they could discuss it further, the station sensors flared. Warp signatures. Multiple contacts dropping from faster-than-light travel. Close. Too close. Silas pulled up the scanner display. 3 ships. Not Dominion signatures. These were different. Smoother. Faster. Private vessels. Kenna's eyes narrowed. Not coalition, not military. No, Silas said quietly. Worse. Those are independent hunters. Freelancers. Someone put a bounty on you fast. The ships moved into orbit above Greyhawk. A communication channel opened. A woman's voice came through. Calm. Almost amused. Well, I'll be damned. A human maintenance tech starting an interstellar incident. Silas Brennan, I hoped you were still alive. Silas smiled despite the danger. Captain Reese Caldwell, I hoped you'd recognize my encryption signature. Hard to forget the man who taught half my crew how to ghost past Dominion checkpoints. Her tone shifted. Mind telling me why the entire sector's suddenly buzzing about 2 Solari resonance females and a human who bonded them? Silas looked at Lyra, looked at Kenna. This was the moment, the choice. Let someone else speak for them, or let them speak for themselves. Lyra stepped forward, moved to the communication console, and spoke. My name is Lyra Thorne, she said clearly. My sister is Kenna. We were hunted. We were dying. We were rescued. And now we refuse to be owned. Silence followed, long enough that Lyra wondered if she'd made a mistake, if her voice wasn't enough, if speaking would only bring more danger. Then Reese Caldwell laughed, not mockingly, but with something that sounded like pride. Still sounds like humans? Welcome to the mess. The journey from Greyhawk to Perseverance took 2 hours. Lyra spent most of it staring out the transport window at the ice fields falling away below. Kenna sat beside her, silent, processing. Silas sat across from them, checking equipment he didn't need to check. All three of them adjusting to the reality that they were no longer alone, no longer hunted in isolation. When the airlock opened and warm air rushed in, carrying voices and the smell of food and life, Lyra felt something crack open in her chest. Hope. Dangerous. Fragile. Real. Ready? Silas asked quietly. Lyra nodded, stepped forward, into noise, into community, into the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The meeting happened aboard Reese Caldwell's ship. The vessel was called Perseverance, a name that felt deliberate, intentional, like a promise carved into metal. The interior was warm, crowded, alive with voices in movement. People from a dozen different species working side by side. Humans talking with Tovari engineers. Koresh navigators sharing data with Solari technicians. This wasn't a military ship. This was a community that happened to fly. Lyra took a breath, steadied herself, and walked forward on her own. Reese met them in the command briefing room. She was 54 years old and looked like every one of those years had been earned through fire. Short gray hair, scars on her hands, eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything but still chose to care anyway. She wore an old U.S. Space Force jacket with the insignia torn off, a reminder of what she'd left behind. Sit, Reese said. Not an order, an invitation. They sat. Kenna kept her posture perfect, alert, ready to move. Lyra sat differently, leaning forward, engaged, like she was finally in a room where her presence mattered. Reese studied them both openly. The Dominion will never let this go, she said without preamble. Resonance bond females represent leverage, power, control. Every empire in the settled galaxy has used Solari females to influence populations, seal alliances, guarantee loyalty. You two walking free, bonded to a human who doesn't want to exploit that bond, that's not just an anomaly, that's a threat to the entire system. Kenna met her gaze. Then they'll have to learn what refusal looks like. Reese's eyes flickered with something like respect. Bold words, but words don't stop warships. No, Lyra said quietly, but they start movements, and movements change what warships are willing to fire at. Reese tilted her head, considering. You're young. I'm aware of my age, Lyra replied. I'm also aware that being young doesn't make my voice less real. Fair point, Reese pulled up a star map. Tactical displays showing Dominion fleet positions, trade routes, political boundaries. Here's the situation. Word is spreading. Other species are watching. Some quietly cheering, some terrified. Silas frowned. Why terrified? Because if humans start choosing people over profit, Reese said, the whole system breaks. Every treaty, every trade agreement, every power structure built on the idea that value is something you can measure and own, all of it depends on people accepting their place in the hierarchy. You three just stood up and said no, and others are watching to see if that's possible. If you survive, it means they might too. If you die, it confirms that refusal is suicide. Lyra felt the weight of that settle over her. She hadn't just saved her own life. She'd become a symbol. And symbols were dangerous because they belonged to everyone who saw them, not just the person living them. What do we need, Kenna asked. Protection, visibility, allies. Reese zoomed in on a section of the map. I can provide ships. I can provide people willing to stand between you and Dominion hunters. But here's the truth. This only works if you go public. If you hide, you're just targets waiting to be found. If you speak, you become witnesses. And witnesses are harder to kill quietly. Lyra's heart raced. Speaking publicly meant exposure, meant every empire would know her face, her name, her story. There would be no going back to anonymity, no chance to disappear even if she wanted to. But hadn't she already chosen that? When she activated the beacon? When she sent that message through the storm? Those words had already made her visible. Now the only question was whether she'd let others define what that visibility meant. "I'll speak," Lyra said. Kenna turned sharply. "Lyra, wait. Think about this." "I have thought about it." Lyra met her sister's eyes. "For 3 years I've been preparing for this moment. Learning skills you dismissed. Building knowledge you thought was useless. I wasn't wasting time, Kenna. I was getting ready for the day I'd have to think for myself. That day is now." Something broke in Kenna's expression. Not anger, something deeper. The realization that she'd spent 9 years protecting Lyra from a world she didn't understand, and in doing so, had never seen how strong Lyra had become despite that protection. "You were never useless," Kenna whispered. "I just didn't want you to need those skills. I wanted you safe." "I know," Lyra said gently, "but safe isn't the same as alive, and I'm ready to be alive now." The Dominion's response came 6 hours later. A broadcast across official channels, formal, cold, precisely calculated to sound reasonable while demanding complete surrender. The message played in Reese's command center. Everyone gathered to listen. The voice belonged to Executor Valen, one of the Dominion's senior authorities. His words were measured, almost kind. "To the vessels harboring unregistered Silari biological assets, the Dominion recognizes that certain parties may have acted with incomplete information. We offer resolution. Return the residence bond females to proper custody. Publicly renounce human interference in interspecies commerce protocols. Return to your previous operations without penalty. You have 12 hours to comply. Failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile action against lawful Dominion authority. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center. Then Lyra laughed, not hysterically, not from fear, from recognition. "He called us biological assets, not people, not individuals, assets." Reese nodded. "That's how they think, how they've always thought." "Then they've already lost," Lyra said. "Because I'm not an asset, I'm a person, and people don't accept ownership quietly." Silas spoke for the first time in an hour. "What are you thinking?" Lyra stood, walked to the star map, looked at the positions of ships, stations, trade routes, all the pieces of a galaxy that ran on systems designed by people who believed control was the same as order. "I'm thinking," Lyra said slowly, "that the Dominion made a mistake. They think this is about 2 Solari females. They think if they recapture us, the problem goes away. But that's not what this is about anymore." She turned to face the room. Faced Reese, faced Silas, faced her sister, faced all these people who had chosen to stand when standing was dangerous. "This is about every person who was ever told their voice doesn't matter. Every species that was ever reduced to economic value. Every individual who was ever called property instead of human, or Solari, or Talvari, or Koresh. The Dominion thinks they're containing one incident. But what if we show them this isn't an incident? It's a beginning." Kenna stood slowly. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we don't just survive," Lyra said. "We speak, loudly, publicly. I want to tell our story, all of it. How we were hunted, how we were saved by a human who asked nothing in return. How we chose freedom even when it meant risking everything. And I want to include something else." She looked at Kenna. "The data you stole, the trafficking records, all of it." Kenna's breath caught. "Lyra, that data, if we release it, every empire implicated will come for us. It won't just be the Dominion. It'll be dozens of governments, corporations, criminal syndicates. We'll have enemies we can't count." "I know," Lyra said, "but we'll also have something they can't fight. Truth. Witnessed by millions, recorded, undeniable." Silas stepped forward. "Kid, that's dangerous. That's burn every bridge, make enemies forever dangerous." "I know," Lyra repeated, "but 300 Solari females are still enslaved in that data, still being trafficked, still being used as leverage. And if we stay silent to save ourselves, we're complicit in their continued suffering." The room was absolutely quiet. Every person processing what Lyra was suggesting, not just defiance. Revolution, small scale, yes, but revolutions always started small. Started with one person saying no when everyone expected yes. Reese broke the silence. You understand what you're asking. If we do this, there's no going back, no negotiating, no quiet settlements. We'll be committed. I understand, Lyra said. And you're willing to risk your life for people you have never met, sisters you don't know? Lyra's voice was steady, absolute. I'm willing to risk my life so that no one else has to choose between silence and death. So that the next Solari female who gets buried under ice has a galaxy that will look for her, that will see her, that will believe she matters. Kenna stood beside her sister. Not in front, beside. Then we do this together. Reese studied them both. These two sisters who had been hunted, frozen, rescued, bonded, and now stood ready to set fire to the systems that had tried to own them. Then she smiled. All right, let's make some noise. The preparation took 4 hours. Lyra worked with Kenna to decrypt the trafficking data completely. 300 names, 300 faces, 300 Solari females sold over 12 years to client governments across 40 systems. The documentation was meticulous. Dates, locations, transaction values, corporate signatures, government authorizations. It was a map of systematic dehumanization, and it was irrefutable. While Kenna handled the technical extraction, Lyra worked on something else, her testimony, the words she would say when the galaxy was watching. She wrote and rewrote, crossing out phrases that sounded too angry, too victim-like, too performative. She needed words that were simple, true, undeniable. Silas found her in the ship's observation deck, staring at a datapad surrounded by discarded drafts. Can't find the right words? He asked gently. I keep trying to make it sound important, Lyra admitted. Like it needs to be this grand statement. But every time I write something big, it feels false. Silas sat down across from her. Elena used to say the most powerful truths are the simplest ones. You don't need to convince people you matter. You just need to remind them that mattering is a right, not a privilege someone else grants. Lyra looked at him, this man who had lost everything and still chose to help strangers. What would you say if you were me? Silas thought for a moment. I'd tell the truth, no decoration, no performance, just what happened and why it matters. Lyra nodded slowly, deleted everything she'd written. Started over with one simple truth. The broadcast went live at hour 11 of the Dominion's deadline. Reese had tapped into every independent network, every free channel, every communication system that didn't filter through official Dominion infrastructure. The signal reached 14 star systems simultaneously. Billions of beings received it at once. The feed opened on Lyra's face. She sat in a simple chair. No dramatic lighting, no propaganda styling. Just a young woman looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen death and chosen to live anyway. My name is Lyra Thorne, she began. I am 24 years old. I am Solari. 3 days ago, I was dying under ice on Titan's Reach Station. My sister Kenna and I were buried in an avalanche. We had minutes of oxygen left, and I made a choice. She paused. Let that settle. I activated an emergency beacon even though my sister begged me not to, even though it would reveal our location to the people hunting us. I chose to be seen rather than die invisible. And a human named Silas Brennan chose to answer that call. He risked his life to pull us from the ice. He asked for nothing in return. He gave us the choice to leave whenever we wanted. He treated us as people, not property. Lyra's voice remained calm, steady, but there was steel underneath. The Dominion calls us biological assets. They demand our return to proper custody. They offer compensation for our lives like we're equipment that malfunctioned. But I am not an asset. I am not property. I am a person, and I refuse to be owned. She gestured off screen. The display split. On one side, Lyra's face. On the other, data. Scrolling lists of names, faces, transaction records. These are 300 Solari females, 300 sisters, sold, trafficked, used as leverage across 40 star systems over 12 years. The Dominion knows about this. Client governments authorized this. Corporations profited from this. And everyone stayed silent because silence was profitable. The data continued scrolling, name after name, face after face. each one a person reduced to transaction value. One of these names is my mother, Alara Thorne, sold 9 years ago to a mining consortium on Callisto. I was 15 years old when she vanished. My sister has spent 9 years searching for proof of what happened. This data is that proof. Lyra leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera, speaking to every being watching across 14 systems. I'm sharing this because silence protects predators, because invisibility enables trafficking, because as long as we stay quiet, nothing changes. The Dominion wants me to surrender, to return to custody, to accept that my life belongs to systems, not to me. But I'm done being quiet. I'm done being invisible. I'm done accepting that my value is something others measure. She stood. The camera followed her. I stand between freedom and erasure. The Dominion has warships. I have truth. If they kill me, remember my name. Remember these 300 names. And ask yourself, who's next? When will it be your sister, your daughter, your friend? When will you be the one buried under ice hoping someone cares enough to dig? Lyra's final words were simple, direct. I am Lyra Thorne. I am not property. I am not silent. I am not afraid. And I will keep speaking until all 300 sisters are free. The broadcast ended. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the galaxy exploded. Messages flooded every network. Independent media picked up the story. Investigative journalists started cross-referencing the trafficking data. Species that had suffered quietly for generations saw their pain validated. Humans felt something they had forgotten. Pride. Not in conquest, not in dominance. In the simple act of standing for someone who couldn't stand alone. The Dominion's response was immediate and massive. 40 warships dropped from warp in the sector, surrounded Reese's position, surrounded every independent vessel that had declared support. The message was clear. Comply or burn. A transmission came through. Executor Valen again. But this time his voice held no pretense of courtesy. You have made a grave error. The data you released is classified intelligence. Its distribution constitutes an act of economic terrorism. Surrender immediately or face military intervention. Reese muted the transmission, looked at Lyra. This is it. They're going to force our hand. Make us fight or fold. Lyra shook her head. No, they're going to make themselves the villain while the galaxy watches. She opened a new broadcast channel. Public, unencrypted. Anyone could access it, and everyone did. The viewership numbers climbed into the billions within seconds. Executor Valen, Lyra said calmly, you're threatening to fire on unarmed civilian vessels because I told the truth about trafficking. You're prepared to kill thousands of beings because I refuse to be property. Do it. Fire your weapons. Kill us all. But understand that billions are watching. Every shot you fire will be recorded. Every death will have a name. Every act of violence you commit to silence me will prove everything I said about you. Valen's face appeared on screen, cold, calculating. You cannot win this confrontation. I already won, Lyra replied, because I'm not trying to defeat you militarily. I'm showing everyone who you really are. You can kill me, but you can't kill what I started. And the harder you try, the more people will ask why. Why is the Dominion so desperate to silence one 24-year-old woman? What are they so afraid of? She leaned closer to the camera. You built an empire on the belief that people would stay silent, that victims would accept their place. That truth could be buried under bureaucracy and force. But I'm here, speaking, witnessed by billions. And every second you hesitate to fire, every moment you spend calculating whether killing me is worth the political cost, you prove that silence was never strength. It was just fear. And I'm not afraid anymore. The transmission held. Valen stared at this young woman who should have been terrified, who should have been begging for mercy, who instead stood firm and dared him to make her a martyr. Behind him, other Dominion commanders were visible, whispering, arguing, some clearly uncomfortable with the optics of massacring civilians on live broadcast. Client governments were already sending messages, distancing themselves, condemning the trafficking data, protecting their own interests. The system was fracturing, not because of military defeat, because of truth witnessed by too many people to ignore. Valen's jaw tightened. This isn't over. You're right, Lyra agreed, Because I'll keep speaking until all 300 sisters are free. Until every being who was ever called property gets their name back. Until the systems that allowed this are broken. You can kill me today, but tomorrow someone else will speak, and another after that, and another, because you taught us something valuable, Executor. You taught us that silence protects you more than it protects us. Valen killed the transmission. For 10 minutes, the Dominion fleet held position, weapons powered, targeting systems locked. Then one by one, ships began withdrawing. Not all of them, but enough. Commanders who refused to fire on civilians. Captains who realized this wasn't a military operation anymore. It was a massacre waiting to be documented. The flagship was last to leave. A final transmission came through. Text only. Your voice has been noted. The Dominion will respond appropriately. Then they were gone. Reese let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. Around the command center, people collapsed into chairs, embraced, cried, laughed. They had survived. Not through violence, through visibility. Lyra sat down slowly. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Kenna wrapped her arms around her sister. No words, just presence. Silas approached quietly. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Lyra looked up at him. I learned it from your wife, from you. Refusal matters, even when it's dangerous, especially then. The council didn't act immediately. Systems never did. But the record was established. The truth was documented, and Lyra Thorne had proven that one voice, amplified by courage, could reach further than any empire wanted to believe. That evening, before the transport back to Reese's ship, Lyra stood in a private waiting room. The door opened. A woman entered, thin, gray in her hair that hadn't been gray 9 years ago, eyes that had seen too much but still held recognition. Lyra, the word was barely a whisper. Mom. Alara Thorne crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her daughter into her arms. No words, just bodies remembering what it felt like to be safe, to be held, to be home. Kenna appeared in the doorway, stopped. Alara looked up, saw her older daughter, and reached out. Kenna came forward slowly. The 3 of them stood together, 9 years of separation collapsing into one moment of impossible reunion. I thought I'd never see you again, Alara whispered. We found you, Kenna said. We'll find the others too. Alara pulled back, looked at both her daughters. I heard what you did, what you said. Lyra, you spoke for all of us. I spoke because you couldn't, Lyra replied, but your voice is coming back now. All of your voices. They talked for hours about the 9 years lost, about the mining consortium, about how Alara had survived by teaching other trafficked females to hope. Small rebellions, quiet resistance, staying human when systems tried to reduce them to numbers. I'm not the same person you remember, Alara admitted. Neither are we, Kenna said, but we're still family. That doesn't change. Late that night, Lyra found Silas on Perseverance's observation deck. He was staring at Earth's distant light, visible even from this far out. You did it, he said without turning. You saved your mother, started a movement, changed the galaxy. We did it, Lyra corrected. You came into the storm. That's where this started. Silas shook his head. No, I just didn't walk away. You're the one who chose to be loud about it. Lyra stood beside him. What will you do now? Go back to Titan's Reach. Keep the relays running. Maybe help a few more people who need somewhere to hide while they figure out how to stop hiding. That sounds lonely. It is, Silas admitted. But it's the kind of lonely that means something now. Because I know what I'm protecting. Who I'm protecting. He finally looked at her. Elena would have liked you. Would have said you're exactly the kind of stubborn that the galaxy needs. I would have liked her too. Silas reached into his jacket, pulled out a small data chip. This is for you. Coordinates, safe houses, people in the network who'll help. You're going after the other 278. You'll need allies. Lyra took the chip. Thank you for everything. And thank you for reminding me that some things are worth coming in from the cold for. He smiled, even if I'm going back out there. They stood in comfortable silence. 2 people who had saved each other in different ways, who had proven that humans in Solari didn't need biological bonds to choose each other. They just needed to believe the other person mattered. 3 months later, Lyra stood with Kenna and their mother aboard a ship called New Dawn. They were headed toward Callisto, where intelligence suggested 12 more Solari females were being held. Reese had provided the ship. Silas had provided the intel, and Lyra had provided the voice that made others willing to risk standing with them. The resonance bond was gone completely now, had been for months. Lyra's biology had released Silas once she no longer needed an anchor to survive. But the connection remained. Not biological, chosen. The kind that mattered more because it was freely given. Kenna stood at the navigation console, plotting their approach. Alara was in medical, preparing for potential rescues, and Lyra sat in the captain's chair, writing her next broadcast. "Ready?" Kenna asked. Lyra looked at her sister, at her mother, at the crew of volunteers who had joined their mission. People from a dozen species who had decided that trafficking was everyone's problem. That silence was everyone's shame. That speaking mattered more than safety. "Ready," Lyra said. The ship jumped to warp, and across the galaxy, in shelters and stations and shadows where people were still waiting to be found, hope grew a little stronger, because Lyra Thorne had proven something fundamental. That being buried under ice wasn't the end. That losing your voice wasn't permanent. That refusing to die as property was the first step toward living as a person. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was scream into the void and trust that someone would hear you. Someone always did.